first time I taught, it was a story. I brought you guys along with me on my journey to learn wisdom, and I got to the end of that, and we had a discussion about wisdom. And then the second time was a much larger. I brought up points and let us discuss together as a group what each point meant and what we thought about it. This time, I think I intend to do a message. So the discussion will be a little bit limited tonight, just from the nature of what I'm talking about and where I'm thinking. I think that would be better suited. But I will, at the end, we'll be calling for questions, and if anybody has anything to add, just because I think that's pretty valuable. Other than that, I don't know how many times you have to stand in front of your congregation and give a message or teach before you don't get nervous before. Yeah. You do it?
Never happens.
Oh, that's so encouraging, Pastor. Thanks for that. Well, let me tell you, it hadn't happened yet, and apparently it hadn't happened for Pastor either. So, before we get started, I'm going to pray. Dear Lord, I thank you for this time that we can be in your building, in your house, among your people. I ask that you give me the words to say, and let my voice carry your will. I ask that the things that I have to say be impactful, that this congregation not leave the way they came, but that they hear your word and choose to change, Lord. And I ask these things in your name. Amen. So, this evening we are in Luke 14:27 through 33, and most of you are familiar with this passage. This is, well, I'll just read it out, and you guys will probably start quoting it about halfway through. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you desires to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see him will begin to mock him, saying, "This man began to build and was not able to finish." Or what king going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 men to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Now, I've been chewing on this passage for quite a while. I remember when I moved to Oklahoma, I called my grandmother sometime after I moved every Wednesday night. I got home from church, and then on the way home I'd call her and I'd talk to her for sometimes it's 2 hours. Which is okay because Grandma was in California, so she wasn't up until 9, and I was perfect, right? And I remember then talking about this verse with her and asking her questions about the cost. And it's weighed heavy on me from that time to now. And I've thought about and considered what is the cost of following Christ. What does it mean to follow Christ? And so I'm gonna walk you through, similar to the way I did with wisdom, I want to walk you through what conclusion I came to and how I got there. And I started by just, every time I read a story, I thought about what it cost that person and what they spent to follow Christ. And the first story you come to in the Bible that really has a lot of substance to it. There's the creation story, and then there's Noah, and I'll come back to Noah. And then there's Abraham. And you get to Abraham, and Abraham is crazy because God comes to him, and as our first example of sacrifice, he asks that Abraham, correct, picks up his house and goes to a land that God has shown him, where he's surrounded by enemies and people who speak a different language than him. Take all that stuff up, leave everything else behind, and settle in this foreign land. And if you do, that's the land I'm going to give you. And I'm going to make you a nation, a man who supposed to lose that too, but he managed to hold on to Lot. He loses his home. He loses his friends. Any comforts he has being around the rest of his clan. He loses it all, right? He sells everything to go to this foreign land and find himself in God's promise. And then the second guy I come to is Jeremiah. And I know it's a leap, right? We've gone quite a ways into the Bible to get to Jeremiah. And there's a lot of people in between Jeremiah and Abraham. I don't know if you know that. But Jeremiah is a pitiful soul. This guy is made into a prophet by God. And if you guys don't know, Jeremiah is in Israel after the first, I believe it's after the first time Jerusalem is sacked, but before the second time. So he's in that in-between era of Israel. And Jeremiah spends 40 years in different places in Jerusalem telling everybody about the destruction God is going to wrought on Israel for the sins they've committed against him. And Jeremiah loses quite a lot, right? Now we don't know that he had friends and family, but we can assume he probably lost them at some point along the way. 40 years is a long time. But Jeremiah multiple times gets thrown into a dungeon. Or he gets taken and he's first in the first place he's at is in the temple, and he gets thrown out of the temple. And then he goes to the gate to the king's palace, and then he gets thrown out of there, and he's got to go to the front gate of Jerusalem. And then they don't even really want him in the city, so they throw him out of the city, until eventually they get really tired of him, and they throw him in a dungeon until God brings him back out, because they have to have somebody to prophesy over something, and Jeremiah's the only guy who can do it. And so they bring Jeremiah out, and then they don't like what he says when he prophesies, and they throw him back in the dungeon. Jeremiah loses a lot, but chiefly among these things, he loses his time of 40 years he spends for a people who never listen to him. Because when Babylon comes the second time and destroys the temple and razes Jerusalem to the ground, the king of Israel, who had been told and told and told and told, dies. Because he didn't listen to the man who knew what was right. But Jeremiah doesn't just lose his time. He doesn't just lose that 40 years. And I shouldn't say lose. He doesn't sacrifice that 40 years. No, he sacrifices his dignity too. Because for 40 years he's treated like a madman. He's called the wailing prophet. And he's harassed and he's treated as an unwanted individual. And to the point where they are so intolerant of him that they cannot stand to even look at him. And they have to put him somewhere where he can't be a nuisance to anybody. He loses his dignity, his reputation. The name of Jeremiah is never the same in Israel. And then we move forward. And we get to Stephen. And Stephen, he gets saved. Christ has come, right? And the new church has arisen after Pentecost. And Stephen's one of these guys who gets saved. And Stephen walks into the den of vipers, that is the Sanhedrin. And he starts telling them all the things that their fathers have done wrong. And he says, if you would listen to Moses, you would know Christ too. But no, you and your fathers killed Moses. Didn't want to hear what he had to say. You killed the prophets, and you killed Daniel, and you even killed Christ, the one you were looking for. And he declares all of these things to these people, and they are just upset. They're in a rage. And so they stomp their feet, and they get some rocks, and they stone him right there and then. Stephen hasn't been a Christian follower of God for probably a long time, but he's not been a Christian for very long. He didn't have salvation for very long. But what he ends up sacrificing is his very life. He ends up laying down his life for it. And that's not the worst thing. I shouldn't say the worst thing. That's not the bulk. That's not everything God can ask of you. God can ask for your home, and he can ask for your family and your friends, and he can ask for your time, and he can ask for your reputation, and he can ask for your very life. And he can ask for one more thing. Paul, the apostle, stands, to me, he's the ultimate example. I mean, Jesus is the ultimate example, but Paul's this flawed character, this flawed guy that you get to see transform from one to another. And it gives me courage that I can be that way too. Right? So he's this inspiration of a person for me. And Paul spends his first part of his life condemning the Christians. His zeal for God makes him believe that the Christians are wrong and that they're raising up a false god, a false prophet. And so he condemns them, and he goes, and not by his own hands, but by the hands of those around him, that he encourages the Christians die. In fact, he's on his way to Damascus when God finally changes his mind. And from that time on, Paul sacrifices everything that I've already talked about. He sacrifices his home, his family, and the comforts of his life, and the wealth that he had accumulated as a member of the Sanhedrin, or the Pharisees, or I don't remember which he's part of, off the top of my head. But he sacrifices his time and his reputation among all those people that he's been about his whole life. And eventually he's going to give up his life. But before he does that, he doesn't just sacrifice those things for a time. He lives with those sacrifices. God asks him to move from his home, to abandon his family, to lose his reputation, to spend his time. And he doesn't just ask him to do it for a little while. Stephen gets about 45 minutes or an hour, however long it takes for him to get those guys up into a frenzy. And the sermon we have is not very long. And that's not to diminish what Stephen does, right? He dies for it. And that's a glory to him, and that's a glory to God that he dies for it. But Paul lives for Christ. Paul lives for Christ. When Paul introduces himself, the very first thing out of his mouth is that here I am, the Apostle Paul, bondservant of Jesus Christ. And a bondservant is no better than a slave. He says, I'm at the will of God at all times, and for any reason I'll do what he tells me. Paul gives up his freedom in the pursuit of learning who God is and being close to God. And he voluntarily lays down everything that I've already talked about, and he's free. He is no longer Paul, but he is Paul, servant of Christ. And if you start reading the Bible and you start thinking and considering each and every one of these people and all the things that they give up, you really come to the same conclusion. That what God asks of you is to give not just your Wednesdays and your Sundays, not just 30 minutes a day on reading your Bible and praying, and not just a little here and a little there, but he asks you to give up everything. I don't want just a little bit, he says. I want it all. I want you from the beginning to the end. I want that whenever I ask you to do something, you tell me, I'll do it. Here am I, Lord. Pick me. Right? just start picking names out of the Bible. I went to Hebrews 11 and just looked at the faith chapter, and every person down that list gives up something. The first person on the list is Abel. He's the very first person in the chapter of faith in Hebrews 11. And Abel, guess what he does? He dies. He dies for the sacrifice he gives to God, of no fault of his own, doing everything he was supposed to be doing. And he dies for it. I mean, I could imagine his neighbors are probably doing the very same thing that God tells us not to do, which is start building something without counting the cost. They're laughing at it. They're laughing at it. Why are you building a boat? There's no water. And he loses any of his extended family. You know, he gets to keep his sons and his wife, but everybody else dies. Friends, family. He loses his home. All for the sake of following God's will, doing what God asks. And then you come back to Abraham. And Abraham doesn't just give up his home, but he gets to the place where he sees God's promise fulfilled. And the son is born. He's got his son. And then God asks him to give that up too. Go up to the hill, take your son up there, and sacrifice him to me. And in Hebrews it says that Abraham, I'm on Noah tonight. Abraham was so willing to do it. It is a credit to him. It is the reason that he makes it into the faith chapter is because he's willing, in faith, to sacrifice the promised son from his beloved wife. If it means following God's will. This is the promise. This is what he was given. And he's willing to throw it away. My desires and my goals and what I want is less important than what you ask of me, God. That's what Abraham is saying when he goes to sacrifice his son. And then David goes and he gets told he's going to be king. And then it takes 20 years or somewhere in that neighborhood before he gets to become king. He spends 20 years in the wilderness of the Philistines fighting for his life, just waiting for God to fulfill his promise. And multiple times he gets put in a position where he can take the life of Saul and become king. And he refuses, saying, God is going to do this work. I don't have to lift a hand. In fact, it would be wrong of me to expedite this process. And he stands on faith. And he stands on faith for 20 years in the wilderness. And we can go on. Ezekiel gives up his tongue. He's mute. From the time he becomes a prophet to the day he dies, he's mute. Can't speak. And he does all kinds of crazy stuff. No one has worse reputation than Jeremiah and Ezekiel, just so that you guys know. And each person in the Bible has to give something up. They're asked to give something up. And when they're asked to give something up, the choice they make, each and every time, is, I'll do it. Whatever you ask of me, I'll do it. And this list doesn't include everybody, right? I haven't talked about everybody. There's still like the Esthers of the world who have to put their life on the line to try to accomplish something. And there's the Ezras and the Nehemiahs and every person along the way. Even Jonah has something to lose. And Jonah didn't even want to be there. But I'm gonna leave you with two more things. I'm gonna go back to Paul, because I really think Paul is the perfect non-ideal example. This is not Jesus. We're not looking at Jesus, the perfect guy, right? We're looking at Paul, his humble servant. And he lives his life day in and day out, doing the will of God. And he goes where God sends him, and he guides those to whom he sent. And he knowingly speaks in places that at God's prompting, that's going to end in him in chains. I am nothing. I'm the least among the disciples. Or the apostles. I'm the bondservant of Christ. I'm the lowest of the low. Over and over again, He makes it clear who he serves and who the glory goes to. Because I'm not living for myself. This isn't my plan. This is God's plan. And I'm going to follow it. If it kills me, and it does kill me. And then you get to the very final example, the one that I've skipped over like 3 times. It's Jesus. And if you think about Jesus' life, Jesus comes to this earth to live. Right? God puts him on this earth. And Jesus spends his entire 32 years of his life, from day 1 to the day he dies, serving the people around him, doing the will of the Father. In fact, he explicitly says it multiple times. He does only the will of the Father. And but not by my will, but by your will, Lord. Father in heaven is my brother and my sister. So he abandons his parents and his family. He says, they're not my family. Only those who do the will of the Father are my family. He's a vagrant, a vagabond. He basically doesn't have enough to live sometimes. He only has what God gives him. He's never rich. He's ridiculed everywhere he goes, especially in his own hometown. And he spends 4 years of his life dealing with Peter, James, and John, and all of the other disciples, and training them and equipping them and pouring himself in them so that when he goes, and he knows he's going to, they'll be ready. And it doesn't work because they're not ready when he goes. He's got to come back a second time, or the first time, to make sure that they get it. And so I ask you this: if God were to come before you, and he were to say, look at the saints, all who have come before you, see what they have done, and now count the cost. And then you were to ask yourself, am I willing to pay? Are you willing to pay what God asks? Are you willing to give up your home, your family, your friends, your security, all of the things of this world, your reputation? Are you willing to give that up? I mean, really willing to give that up. Because God doesn't just ask. The thing is, God doesn't just say that he's going to ask you, but he actually asks people to do this kind of stuff. When I was growing up, I had a children's church teacher. Her name was Teacher Barbara. She died, about 10 years, maybe longer ago, of cancer. When I was a kid and she was teaching me, she took a trip to China. Now, I was a kid, I didn't know what China was like. I had no idea. Stowed away in her luggage. They don't find it. And so she's able to smuggle in 50 Bibles to China. Now when she does this, she tells us, I was asked, God told me to bring that stuff in. And she knew the risk going in. She knew what it could cost her. It could cost her life to get those Bibles in. But she made the decision it was worth dying to do what God asked. It was worth dying for. So, this evening, I want you to ask yourself a question. And I want you to be serious. And I don't want you to ask yourself just right now while I'm talking to you, but I want you to really consider the question: how much am I willing to pay? How much am I willing to pay? The cost is high. It takes a lot to follow Christ. And you could be asked to give up everything. So how much are you willing to pay? And I'm not going to leave you just like that. Because that's a serious question only you can answer for yourself. And it is vital that you answer. And it's vital that you know your answer before God starts asking you to do stuff. Because when God asks you to do something, and you come to that line and you say, I don't know that I'm willing to pay it, it's going to be pretty upsetting. They're going to be pretty sad that you didn't pay it, just like the rich young ruler was, right? But I won't leave you there. I won't leave you just hanging on the edge there. I'll tell you a couple of things that make me feel a little bit better about it. I told you that I started talking to Grandma about this a couple of times. And by a couple, I mean like 6 or 7, which seems to be a habit of mine. I think I've been for a long time. But you know what she told me at that time was, if God had asked more of me, I would have done it. And if I had to go back and I had to go and make all those decisions again, I would do it again. Now, Grandma already made the choice. She already said, I'm giving it all. Everything I can give, whatever you ask of me, God, I'll do. Not everybody has made that choice, and it's because it's a hard choice to make. And don't think that I'm preaching to you as someone who's already come across the finish line. Oh no. I've already thought, and I know I'm not ready to give everything. I know that if God were to come and ask me to go to a foreign land, go to Africa, and spread the good news in Africa, I may be willing to do it, but it would hurt. I wouldn't be very happy about it. And I'm not confident that I would do it. So I'm not telling you I'm not trying to be a hypocrite and tell you, I'm telling you what's seriously important, what this could happen. But every person I've ever talked to who gets to the end of the race, who comes to the other side of their time in ministry, says the very same thing. Just exactly what Paul says. It's exactly what Peter says. It's exactly what James and John and Thomas. It's exactly what Grandma says. I'm sure Brother Weatherby said the same thing. I would do it again. Every time I do it. If you're in a position where you don't know how far. But when God calls you to, do it anyways. Take the next step. That's what I have for you tonight. That's everything I had to say. And this is a heavy, for me it's really heavy, because I got saved when I was young, and I didn't know there was a price to pay. So I had to come back later and choose to pay the price, as much as I chose to ask God for forgiveness. And I still, every day, have to choose to pay the price. Every day, I have to make the choice to stand up and say, I'm going to be better today than I was yesterday. I'll walk a little closer, God. I may not be willing to go to a foreign land yet, but one of these days, if you're ready to ask me, then I'll be ready to say yes. Does anybody have anything to add? Any thoughts? Go ahead.
You know, I've always heard this particular scripture related to finances. I think Ramsey quotes it quite often, but it's a nice change of thought to think about your life as the cost and measuring out what you need to do. That means you got to plan it, right? You got to plan for that cost to be put on your shoulders. I think it's fantastic. Just a whole new way of thinking about that verse.
I had the good fortune of not knowing that it was related to finances, because I don't know.
You don't listen to Dave Ramsey, huh?
No, I've listened to him, I just never put that together. I mean, the verse starts with, pick up your cross and follow me. follow me to death. Follow me to the most gruesome, awful death mankind had imagined to that point, right? That's what crucifixion was. Pick up the cross, follow me. Yeah.
I think Brother Odom is a wonderful example of giving. Total declare. He's not a young man, but he's continuing to carry the gospel. He carries it around the world. He's got trips planned. Still yet he's carrying the gospel and to the work of the Lord. It's encouraging to me to see their strength in the Lord to continue to carry the gospel.
It's an honor to know people who can give more than you. And it's an encouragement because Brother Odom can do it. Yes.
When God calls you, He makes a way. My husband and I first went into the ministry, I cried my eyes out. But the Lord blessed us all the way. Every time we had a need, He took care of it. And He will do that for anybody that steps out by faith and works for Him. Whether it be in a local church or across the ocean somewhere, or maybe in Arizona where we had to go. God will take care of you.
Let's fix and say the same thing.
Aaron, I was raised in a pastor's home, and I was just today, as a matter of fact, I was just thinking about this today, that my father was ordained in the Church of God in 1960, which is a long time ago. Almost 10 years before I was even born. But he had made a commitment to the Lord that he was going to serve God no matter what. And I remember you see that commitment and the cost of things, and we moved from Ohio to Arizona. I was just looking at some pictures. My nephew had sent me a clipping of something that happened to me in Arizona a long time ago. And I looked, there was an address there, and I looked at that address in Google Maps, and it brought to this little church. The church was still there, the building was still there, church wasn't there, but the building was still there. And we had moved from southern Ohio to Casa Grande, Arizona, Dad had taken all 5 of us kids there to pastor a church. And I think about the moving across the country in the middle 70s, about 76 or 77, the cost of that. I mean, I just can't imagine that, moving your family there. And then staying there for as long as he felt like the Lord wanted him there, and then move back. We moved to Texas, and then we went back to Ohio, we moved to Oklahoma, and so just moving around. Well, I get so emotional. But to move your family, not just my children were saying that. How did you guys live in that little bitty house? There's 4 rooms in the back of the church. That's where the parsonage was. And they said, "How did you guys get in there?" And I said, "We just managed." And you did what you had to do because that's where you felt like the Lord wanted you to be. And so you start counting the cost of that. That God will provide. God will provide those needs. And we weren't sure where the next meal was going to come from. I was younger. I didn't think about that. But I'm sure that weighed heavily on my mom and dad's mind. But we were always fed. I don't ever remember missing a meal. And so, because God always provided. So, but it was the stepping out of that and the commitment. But for some reason, it just hits home.
You know, it may not have been as bad for our kids, but they remember moving in some of the small places, some of the bad places that we lived, and some of the times they thought they were starving to death because they didn't have the things that they wanted to eat, but then the times that we had all the chicken give to us, you know, but you sit back and you think about those times and you just praise God that He took care of it. Pastors. But what we didn't know is God was trying to send us to a place to heal us. So sometimes God will send you somewhere that is a great place to take care of you, to heal you. You don't know what it might be, even in that foreign place. I thought Anadarko was a foreign place, but that was my healing place. So when God calls, you go. You be ready. You get to packing because He may call you.
Well,
When you say you won't go, because we were already planning to quit pastoring.
well, I didn't say I wouldn't go. I just said I hope he doesn't. But the more I think about it, just like as Pastor was talking, as you start to unpack each individual thing that God might take, I have in this room no less than 10 people who I can call on in the middle of the night, and I will have their assistance. There's 4 here, there's 4 there, and there's 2 in the back. My family will be there if I need them to. I actually can't call Uncle Danny, I take that back. But I could call Aunt Trish and Uncle Danny would be there. You know what I'm saying? But
You don't have my phone number?
no, no, no. But if you think about it, that's the position I find myself in. And I am blessed beyond measure to be in that position. And I have been in that position all my life. I've lived in a place where there were no shortage of people who were willing to come to my aid if I needed it. But when God says, pack up your things, I'm taking you somewhere else, pick the spot. And the thing is, I know Uncle Paul and Aunt Darla. Uncle Paul's a world traveler, so it doesn't matter where I go. If I can get a hold of him, he'll be there, right? I have that, and I already know that to be true, because I know Uncle Paul, I know his character, right? But if I get in the middle of Africa, I just lost 9/10 of the people who I can count on. You know, I'm in a foreign land. But that's what I mean is you have to be willing to. And the more I think about it, and the more I told this to Grandma a couple years ago too. The higher the cost gets, the more you think about it, because you realize that it's not just you losing your family. It's no, you lost. You literally can't rely on them. Not because they're not willing, because they're not there. The only person you can rely on is God.
That's right.
And every step of the way, every time I think and I understand more and more about this counting the cost business, the more I realize that the only person who's going to be there through everything is going to be God. Which may be my problem, is I just don't have quite enough faith to make it work yet. And I'm still working on building my faith up. But that's the crux of the thing is you should be willing to trust God with your family, your friends, and your ability to live, your life, I won't say livelihood, but I mean your way of eating, right? You should be willing to trust God with all of those things.
What a huge impact and influence Sister Chenault have made on the Chenault family, with the large family, and the impact, all the good counseling and influence and sharing her heart with you.
Any other thoughts?
Uh, song. I don't know if I've heard it since then, but the words caught my attention. And I don't know exactly the words, but the gist of it was, when I get there, when I get to heaven, and I see the Savior, and I look around, and I think, but what if I had given it all? And I remember thinking that, thinking, you know, probably none of us give it all. And that's where you're going with this. When we count the cost, and like the guy that's building the building, what we do is we want to build up more than enough to make sure we don't cut it short. And your lesson is more about pouring everything into it and getting whatever, and relying on God to make up the difference. But in that scenario, the way we normally look at it, it's make sure that you don't get it all. It's make sure you've got enough, and you built up enough. Count the cost, and make sure you've got more than enough to finish the building. And that's in relation with our Christian life. Building up things, the scripture tells us to build up things on earth where moth and rust can corrupt it, is not our goal. It is laying things up in heaven. And the only thing that you can send on or get there are lives, people.
I had the kids stick with us for this one, hoping that they would listen well enough, because it's really, really important, especially for new Christians, to know what's required. It took me a very long time to know what was required. And it's funny because I remember when I was a kid, I heard many a message about God doesn't just want Sunday and Wednesday. I've heard that I don't know how many times. But it doesn't land until you really start adding up what David and Jonathan and Joseph and Jeremiah and Abraham and Jacob, and when you start adding up what each one of these people end up paying in the service of God. And some people pay a little bit, and some people pay a lot. But it's not really about what you pay, it's about what you're willing to. If you're not willing to take your son up on that hill and sacrifice him for the sake of God, for God's will, you aren't willing to give enough. And that's hard. That's no easy thing. And I'm really glad God gives grace, because I need it. Every day I look around and say, well, I'm just about got to where I can start thinking about hiring someone to maybe put a drop of cement on the ground. I'm really glad that I don't have to lay the whole foundation yet, because I didn't make it. Couldn't do it. Not right this second, but every day, as we grow closer and closer to God, little by little.
And it can hit us by surprise, but we can go through some very hard things in life. And you said 3 words earlier that just kind of stuck with me. You said, keep on walking. Those are simple words. But when we go through those hard things, and we begin to go through the cost, we have to be determined to keep on walking and not give up. Because that's what the enemy wants us to do. There's been so many times in my life that I wanted to just give up. What's the use? I keep serving God and all these horrible things keep happening to me. What's the use? That's the enemy talking. And you said those three words just really pierced my heart. Keep on walking. Count the cost. No matter the cost, we have to be determined to keep on walking. Because it's not just about us. It's about everybody else around us that sees us walking in the light of the Lord. No matter what we go through, we're still hanging on to the hand. Sometimes even your very own church, and I mean, I just got all kinds of stories. We can be here all night, but he never quit. He kept on walking in the will of God because that was God's call on his life. And whenever he would be under attack over something, he would eventually win the battle and be a better man for it. God would make him a better man, a stronger man, more faith. And I saw him go through this the whole time I was growing up. And so many times, us kids were like, why do we keep doing this? And we have to count the cost, and we just got to keep on walking. That's a message in itself.
I'm going to pray. Lord, I thank you for this day and this time that we can come and hear your word. I ask that we continue to meditate on this idea of counting the cost, that it continue to resonate with us, that we would know what it is to pay, what it is to sacrifice for Christ, and we'd be willing to do it. Lord, I ask that you bless these people, this congregation that you've put in my hands, and that you've given me to them, Lord, that you keep your hand upon them and that they leave this place changed. I ask that you bless this congregation in many ways and many times, but most of all, I ask that you give them the strength, the courage to keep paying the cost, to look at the overwhelming amount that you ask and to say every day it's worth spending